The last thing my sister expected on her wedding day was my face appearing on a giant screen just seconds before she walked down the aisle. She had banned me, erased me, and told the whole family I was unstable. But the video I sent did not beg for forgiveness. It opened with one sentence that turned the room cold. If loyalty mattered to this family, none of you would be sitting there smiling right now. Before we go deeper, tell me where you are watching from, and if family betrayal stories pull you in, subscribe, and stay with me. I did not always believe blood could turn strategic. For most of my life, I was the daughter who fixed things quietly. I was the one who remembered birthdays, mailed thoughtful gifts, showed up early to help set tables, and stayed late to wash dishes, while everyone else took pictures and went home. My name is Ava Mercer, and until the week of my younger sister's wedding, I still carried the childish belief that if I loved my family hard enough, they would eventually love me honestly. That belief died in pieces. It did not die the day my sister Lila called and told me I was no longer invited to her wedding. It did not even die when my mother said I should accept that decision gracefully, because this day is not about you. It died when I realized the wedding was only the stage. The real betrayal had started months earlier, behind smiles, group texts, floral tastings, and fake concern. By the time they cut me out, they had already taken something far more important than a seat at a ceremony. They had taken my place in the family story and replaced it with a lie. The worst part was how polished they made it sound. According to them, I had become bitter, difficult, and emotionally inappropriate after my father's death. I could not handle wedding planning. I created tension. I made everything about old money issues. That was the phrase that should have told me everything old money issues. Because there was nothing old about them. The money issue was very current, very deliberate, very criminal. I only understood that after I found the folder. It was hidden in plain sight, buried in a shared cloud drive my father had once used to organize family trust paperwork, property taxes, and business records from the hardware store he spent 30 years building. I was not snooping. I was looking for a scanned copy of his handwritten chili recipe, because I wanted to make something that tasted like home on a night that had started to feel like exile. Instead, I found a video file with my name in it, not a sweet message, not a memory, a draft recording. My mother and Lila had filmed themselves practicing how to explain my absence at the wedding to guests. They sat side by side on my mother's sofa, smiling the way women smile when they are convinced they are being reasonable. Lila said, "We love Ava, but she has been making things very hard since Dad passed." My mother nodded and added, "Sometimes people isolate themselves when grief changes them." Then Lila laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not a sad one, a relieved laugh. And that was when I realized they were not reacting to my pain. They were managing a narrative. What I did not know yet was why. But I was about to find out. The first person who ever taught me to read a spreadsheet was my father. He believed numbers exposed character. He used to say that a person could rehearse a speech, fake a smile, even forge a signature if they were desperate enough, but sooner or later, numbers would stop cooperating. Numbers left trails. Numbers remembered what people wanted buried. After I found that practice video, I stopped crying almost immediately. Not because I was strong, because I was suspicious. No one rehearses a family lie that carefully unless there is something expensive behind it. My father had owned a profitable regional hardware business in Ohio, along with the building it operated out of and 2 rental properties he had inherited from his own mother. He was not some billionaire patriarch with yachts and secret islands, but he had built security the hard way. He paid off debts early. He kept paper backups of everything. He talked often about fairness. He promised me more than once that after he was gone, his estate would be divided in a way that reflected both love and labor. That mattered because I had worked beside him. Lila had not. I spent summers doing inventory, reconciling deliveries, fixing the website, and later helping modernize the bookkeeping system when online orders became part of the business. Lila floated in and out when she needed cash, posted a few smiling pictures for social media, and acted like she was the face of a legacy she never bothered to carry. My mother adored her for it. Lila had the kind of beauty that made strangers forgive her before she spoke. I had the kind of competence families quietly exploit. After Dad died, I assumed the estate paperwork was delayed because grief makes even basic tasks feel disrespectful. I gave my mother room. I let her take the lead. When she said the attorney was still reviewing everything, I believed her. When she said the store was under temporary restructuring, I believed that too. When Lila started spending strangely designer shoes a custom dressmaker deposits on a wedding venue that looked far beyond her fiancé's salary, I told myself. People make reckless choices when life feels fragile. Then I found the folder. It contained bank transfers, revised trust documents, scanned signatures, and internal accounting reports from the store. At first glance, it looked organized. At second glance, it looked impossible. There were transfers from the business operating account into a separate family management account I had never seen before. Those transfers were labeled as emergency vendor adjustments. But I knew our vendors. I knew the timing, the cycle, the amounts that would make sense after winter ordering versus summer demand. These numbers were wrong in a way only someone familiar with the business would recognize. Not wildly wrong, carefully wrong, small enough to blend in, large enough to change ownership outcomes over time. Then I saw my signature, or rather a version of it, attached to a consent document approving temporary asset consolidation after my father's death. I never signed it. I stared so long at the screen that the letters stopped looking like language. The document claimed I had agreed to transfer my minority beneficiary control over one rental property and a portion of future business proceeds into a temporary holding structure managed by my mother until full probate closed. It framed the move as administrative convenience, but the signature line was fake. The slant was close. The loop in the A was wrong. My father used to joke that my signature looked like I signed everything halfway through an argument. This one looked careful and feminine, the way Lila always wished she looked when she forged my handwriting on school notes in high school. A wave of nausea hit me so hard I had to sit on the kitchen floor. Fraud was the first word that formed clearly. The second was family. I called my mother immediately, which in hindsight was emotional, not strategic. She let it ring out. I called again. Nothing. Then Lila texted me, "Please do not create drama this close to the wedding." No greeting, no question, no confusion about what I might be calling about. That told me enough. I replied that I had found documents with my forged signature and wanted an explanation. She answered 10 minutes later with a message so cold it felt pre-written. "Ava, after everything Mom has dealt with, this is exactly why boundaries are necessary. The estate has been handled appropriately. You are reading things you do not understand and making accusations because you are hurt." There it was, contempt dressed as concern. I wrote back and asked a simple question. "Did you or did you not submit paperwork with my name on it?" She did not answer. Instead, my mother called. Her voice came soft, maternal, exhausted, the same performance she used every time she wanted to control the moral framing before facts entered the room. "Honey," she said, "you have got to stop this." "Stop what?" "Obsessing. Looking for reasons to be excluded." Excluded, as if I were grieving access to centerpieces. I asked her whether she knew my signature had been forged. She sighed, then said something that changed the shape of my anger forever. "Your father understood that some children are builders and some are burdens. He made peace with what each daughter could handle." I remember standing up so fast my chair tipped over behind me. She was telling me in her own polished cruelty that whatever happened had been justified by a private truth about my worth. I asked if she was saying Dad intended to reduce my share. She paused a beat too long. Then she said, "Lila is starting a family. You are alone. Sometimes practical decisions look unfair to emotional people." That was the moment I stopped arguing like a daughter and started thinking like a witness. I ended the call without another word. Then I did what my family never expected me to do. I got organized. I downloaded every file from the folder into 3 separate encrypted backups. I printed the forged consent document. I compared dates on the transfers with payroll timing vendor records and tax filings I still had from helping Dad with quarterly reporting. Within hours, a pattern emerged. Money had been moved steadily out of the store under vague internal labels. One rental property had been reclassified in estate drafts. A life insurance disbursement appeared to have been allocated differently across versions of the trust summary. There were also email chains between my mother and the estate attorney's office. Except one thing felt off. The tone in some replies did not sound like any attorney I had met. Too casual, too eager to reassure. I checked the sender address carefully. One character in the domain name had been changed. It was fake. Someone had created an imitation email address and inserted legal reassurance into active family correspondence. I sat back in absolute silence. This was not favoritism in the emotional sense. This was asset seizure wearing pearls. The next day, I drove to the hardware store, hoping maybe there was still some innocent explanation. Some clerical chaos that could be corrected before everything detonated. Instead, I found Lila's fiancé, Grant, standing behind the front counter, speaking to a supplier as though he belonged there. Grant had always treated me with bland politeness, the kind men use when they do not consider you influential. That day, when he saw me, something in his face tightened. "What are you doing here?" he asked. I almost laughed. My father's store. My inventory system. My labor. My grief. I asked to see the current operating files. He said he could not authorize that. Authorize? The audacity was almost elegant. I asked who had put him in a management role. He said my mother had asked him to stabilize transitions because I had become too erratic to be trusted with business stress. There it was again. The character assassination. Not random, functional. If they made me sound unstable, then any challenge I raised about the estate could be dismissed as grief jealousy or mental decline. I looked around the store and realized even the staff were watching me strangely. Not with hostility, with caution, as if they had already been briefed. On my way out, one of the long-time employees, Denise, caught my arm near the loading entrance. She had worked with my father for almost 20 years and had the kind of face that never hid disgust. "Well, you need to be careful," she whispered. I asked her with whom. She glanced toward the office before answering. "Your mother came in with a banker and that fiancé a few weeks back. They were moving files and saying the old structure was unsustainable. Your name came up, not kindly." I asked if Dad had ever told her anything about his intentions. Denise hesitated, then said, "He said you were the only one he trusted to keep the place honest." I nearly broke right there in the loading bay. Not because it solved anything, because it proved my memory had not betrayed me. Someone else had heard him say it. Someone else knew I was not imagining the life I had with my father. That night, Lila sent the final blow. A formal email from the wedding planner stating that due to family sensitivities, I was not permitted at any wedding event, including the ceremony, reception, rehearsal, dinner, or bridal brunch. Security had been informed. Security! For me, my own sister had not only stolen from me, she had branded me dangerous for noticing. At the bottom of the forwarded planner email was a private note from Lila. "Please do not force consequences on yourself by escalating this publicly." I read that sentence 6 times. Not "do not lie," not "let us talk," not "I am sorry." Do not force consequences on yourself. That was not fear. That was a threat. I printed it and added it to the file. Then I made the call I should have made first. A probate litigation attorney named Elena Brooks listened for 40 minutes without interrupting me once. When I finished, she asked for the documents, the transfer histories, the fake email examples, and anything showing I had been excluded immediately after raising concerns. Her voice remained calm the entire time, but near the end, she said something that made my skin prickle. If these records are real, this is not merely ugly family behavior. This may involve forgery, fraudulent inducement, misappropriation of estate assets, and possible business embezzlement. Hearing it spoken out loud made the betrayal feel both more real and more survivable. Real because the language was serious. Survivable because there were names for what had been done. Crimes have names. That means they can be pursued. 2 days later, Elena confirmed my fears. The forged signature was glaring to a forensic document examiner. The fake legal email chain was obvious once traced. Several asset movements had likely been designed to consolidate control before probate scrutiny intensified. Worse, one transfer appeared connected to the deposit for Lila's luxury wedding venue. They were not just hiding money. They were spending my father's estate to celebrate excluding me from it. That was when the wedding stopped being a heartbreak. It became evidence. Once I had legal confirmation that I was not paranoid grieving irrationally or creating drama, my anger sharpened into discipline. Elena advised me not to confront anyone again without a reason. She said people like this often become careless when they believe they have already controlled the narrative. They rehearse the victim. They mistake silence for defeat. They keep texting because power makes them chatty. She was right. Within 3 days, I received 2 calls from relatives I had not spoken to in weeks. My Aunt Marjorie called first all syrup and hesitation, asking whether I might consider sending Lila a peace gift for the sake of appearances. My cousin Tessa texted to say she was sorry things had gotten misunderstood and hoped I would not embarrass everyone. Not one person asked what actually happened. They were not gathering truth. They were managing optics. That confirmed something important. My mother and Lila had gone wide. They had seeded the family with a version of me that served them. I was grieving badly. I resented the wedding. I felt entitled. I was punishing everyone because I could not handle change. By the time those whispers circulated, any accusation I made would sound like escalation unless I had undeniable proof. So, I began building a timeline that no manipulative retelling could survive. I mapped every suspicious financial movement against key family events. Deposit to the venue, transfer from operating account, revised estate summary, bridesmaid fitting, fake email from the pretend attorney account, my exclusion from planning, another transfer, security instruction at the venue. More business account irregularities. The pattern was grotesquely clean. Each time control tightened around assets, my social position in the family weakened. They were not separate conflicts. They were one coordinated operation. Then Grant made his first real mistake. He emailed me from the store account, asking for login credentials to a supplier portal I had set up years earlier. He claimed an order discrepancy required access to legacy account permissions. Elena nearly smiled when she saw it. If he was truly authorized management, he would already have those credentials through legitimate transfer procedure. Instead, he was phishing, which meant there were still systems he could not access because my father had left more of the business infrastructure in my hands than they realized. I replied politely and asked him to specify which account and which purchase order before I could assist. He answered too fast, listing a vendor relationship unrelated to the portal he requested. Careless. We preserved the exchange. Then Denise called me after work. Her voice shook. She said she had overheard Grant arguing with my mother in the office. He was angry because the probate window was taking too long and the sister should have signed and disappeared by now. Denise did not hear every word, but she heard enough to know I was being discussed as an obstacle, not family. I asked whether she would ever be willing to state that formally. There was a long silence. Then she said, "For your father, yes." That was the first moment I felt the wall around me crack, not collapse. Crack. Elena moved quickly after that. She filed emergency motions to freeze certain disputed asset transfers and compel preservation of records. She also sent formal notice to the real law office whose identity had been imitated. They were furious and cooperative within hours. Their technology consultant needed to confirm that several reassuring emails my mother had forwarded to me were fraudulent, not misunderstood, not misdirected, fabricated. The legal process, however, was not fast enough to reach the wedding date, and that mattered, because by then I understood the wedding was part of the laundering mechanism socially and emotionally. If Lila married beneath floral arches paid for with misdirected estate money while smiling in photographs beside my mother, then the family would psychologically commit to the story that she was the rightful daughter stepping into legacy. Ritual has power. Public rituals especially. They make theft feel ordained. I could not stop the ceremony in court before it happened, but I could stop them from controlling the room. The opportunity came from someone I never expected. My grandmother's old church friend Evelyn called me 3 nights before the wedding. She had known my father since he was a teenager and possessed the kind of unapologetic moral clarity that terrifies polished liars. She said she had heard I was having an episode and wanted to hear the truth directly from me because that family has always mistaken volume for virtue. I told her everything, not dramatically, carefully. When I finished, she said, "Your father once paid my heating bill and never told a soul. I will not sit quietly while his name is used to finance deceit." Then she told me something that altered everything. Her grandson worked for the audiovisual company hired by the wedding venue. I did not speak for a full second. She understood immediately. No stunts, she warned. No nonsense. If you do anything, it better be factual. Factual I could do. Elena could not advise me to interfere with a private event in any unlawful way, and she did not. But she did say a public statement composed entirely of verifiable evidence distributed without trespass and without defamation was very different from emotional disruption, especially if the recipients included individuals materially connected to disputed assets. So I wrote the script for the video. It took me 6 hours and 3 breakdowns. I did not want to sound hysterical. I did not want to sound cold either. I wanted to sound like truth arriving with receipts. I opened with the line that had come to me the moment I saw the fake practice video. If loyalty mattered to this family, none of you would be sitting there smiling right now. Then I introduced myself clearly for the guests who only knew me through whispers. I said I was absent not because I hated my sister, but because I had been formally excluded after discovering forged documents connected to my father's estate. I displayed the fake signature beside samples of my real one. I showed timestamps of transfers from the business account that aligned with wedding payments. I included the fake attorney domain. I quoted Lila's message warning me not to escalate publicly. I kept my tone level. Every claim had a document on the screen. The hardest part was deciding whether to include Dad. Not his image, his words. A month before he died, I had recorded him on my phone during one of those ordinary afternoons people never realize will become sacred. He was sitting in the store office eating soup out of a paper cup, telling me that keeping things honest mattered more than keeping everyone happy. At the time, I recorded it because he looked tired, and I was afraid without admitting it. In the clip, he laughed and said, "Ava, you are the only one who argues with me enough to keep me honest. That is why I trust you." I stared at that file for a long time. Using it felt intimate, painful, final. But then I remembered my mother's voice saying some children were builders and some were burdens. I added the clip. The morning of the wedding, I did not put on a dress. I wore black slacks and sat at my kitchen table with Elena on speaker and 2 legal pads in front of me. One for what we knew, one for what might happen next. She warned me again to do nothing reckless. I promised her I would not. At 2 in the afternoon, Evelyn's grandson confirmed the file had been loaded into the venue system under a generic pre-ceremony media label. It would play on the reception screen loop before the processional visuals began. I nearly threw up. At 4:12, my phone started buzzing. First, "Tessa, what did you do?" Then Aunt Marjorie called me immediately. Then a number I did not know, followed by another, followed by Grant. I let them ring. Finally, Denise texted, "Everyone is freaking out. Your mother tried to stop it after the first minute, but too many people had already seen the documents. The groom's parents are demanding answers. Lila is screaming." I closed my eyes and breathed for what felt like the first time in months. Then Elena called with actual news. The venue owner worried about potential involvement in a disputed asset matter. After guests started forwarding screenshots of the video had requested confirmation of who paid which deposits. Under pressure, the planner admitted that some payments came from an account linked to the hardware business, not from Lila personally. Grant's father, an accountant with a reputation to protect, apparently recognized immediately how bad that looked. The ceremony was delayed. Not canceled yet, delayed. My mother, according to a second-hand report, tried to insist I had fabricated everything. That defense collapsed when the fake email domain was checked in real time by one of Grant's relatives who worked in corporate compliance. Guests stopped whispering and started choosing sides. That was the first major climax of my life with my family. Not when I cried, not when they banned me, when their version of reality lost room to breathe in public. Still, truth does not win cleanly the first time it appears. An hour later, Lila posted a statement online accusing me of exploiting private grief to ruin her wedding, because I had always been jealous of the love she received naturally. She called the financial questions a misunderstanding and said legal processes would prove that I was spiraling. The cruelty did not surprise me. What surprised me was how many people believed it might still work. Because evidence unsettles people, but charisma soothes them. That was when I understood the battle had changed. I had not merely exposed wrongdoing. I had shattered a performance, and performers become vicious when the audience starts thinking. I needed allies, real ones, specific ones, not relatives who liked me in theory but disappeared when conflict became expensive. And like every dangerous family story, the next turn would come from the people who had watched quietly longest. The wedding did not end the way anyone expected. It did not collapse in one cinematic explosion with champagne glasses shattering and police cars circling the valet lane. Real family ruin is more humiliating than dramatic. It leaks. It sours. It forces people to stand in expensive clothes while pretending they are not part of something rotten. By evening, the ceremony had been pushed back twice. Half the guests left before vows. The groom's mother reportedly refused to sit down until she saw proof that her son was not marrying into active fraud. Grant disappeared for nearly an hour. Lila went from rage to tears to icy composure in cycles so rapid that even relatives loyal to her began looking exhausted. And then against every fantasy my angriest self had entertained, the wedding went forward anyway. Reduced guest list. No projected photo montage. No glowing speeches. Just a stripped-down ceremony conducted under a cloud of suspicion so thick that the word congratulations sounded sarcastic in every mouth. I watched none of it. I spent that evening with Elena and a stack of documents, but emotionally, I could picture every detail. My mother holding her spine too straight. Lila smiling with dead eyes. Grant calculating. Relatives whispering in corners while pretending to support love. Something in me hardened permanently that night. Because even with truth in the room, my family still chose pageantry over accountability. The next morning, the backlash began in earnest. My social media filled with indirect attacks. Some accused me of cruelty for humiliating my sister publicly. Some said that even if I had concerns, a wedding was sacred and should not have been touched. One distant cousin wrote that women need to stop tearing each other down over inheritance. That one almost made me laugh, as if forged signatures were a misunderstanding between moody sisters, but mixed in with the noise were private messages. Quiet ones, careful ones. The kind sent by people who had seen enough in families to know when a polished story was rotting underneath. The first came from my father's former bookkeeper, a retired woman named Joanne. She wrote that she had watched the video 3 times and recognized 2 transfer descriptions that did not match how my father classified internal movements. She still had archived notebooks from the years before I digitized the business records. If I needed them, I could come by. The second came from Grant's older sister, Natalie. That message stunned me. She said she did not know me well, but she knew Grant. She had long suspected he treated other people's money like loose furniture. She also said that after the wedding delay, he had called their father in private and asked a question no innocent man would ask, whether a disputed transfer could be reframed as a family gift after the fact. Elena nearly sat up out of her chair when I read that aloud. A guilty man thinks retroactive wording can save him. An innocent one thinks truth can. Within 2 days, our alliance map grew. Joanne provided old handwritten ledgers that matched the clean structure my father maintained for years, which made the post-death accounting irregularities even more obvious. Denise agreed to give a formal statement about conversations she overheard in the store office. Evelyn introduced me to two older family friends who recalled my father speaking plainly at a backyard gathering about wanting me involved in long-term business decisions because I understood stewardship, not just spending. Then came the most emotionally difficult alliance of all, my father's younger brother, Uncle Raymond. Raymond and my father had a complicated relationship built on love, pride, and long periods of silence men mistake for emotional discipline. After Dad died, Raymond kept his distance from all of us. I assumed grief had turned him inward. What I did not know was that my mother had already been poisoning him against me. She told him I planned to sell the store, fire legacy employees, and weaponize probate to punish the family. When he called, I expected accusation. Instead, he sounded tired. "I saw the video," he said. Then I checked something. He told me that 6 weeks before the wedding, my mother had asked him to sign a witness acknowledgement related to the estate, assuring him it was a formality, confirming the family supported streamlined management. He never signed because the language felt slippery. At the time, he brushed it off. After seeing my evidence, he dug the document out of a drawer. It referenced a restructuring schedule I had never been shown, a schedule designed to gradually reduce my practical authority over the business by redefining my role as non-operational and emotionally compromised. I sat in stunned silence while he read sections aloud. They were writing me out on paper and in conversation at the same time. Character erosion as financial strategy. Raymond agreed to meet Elena. That changed the case. He was respected, financially literate, and not emotionally dependent on my mother's approval. If he testified that the restructuring language was concealed and misleading, it would undercut the defense that everything had been transparent family planning. But building alliances does not feel glorious while it is happening. It feels like learning how many people watched you drown before deciding the water was real. Every new ally brought evidence, yes, but also a fresh layer of grief. Joanne admitted she noticed unusual bookkeeping language months earlier, but assumed my mother had consulted attorneys. Denise confessed she wanted to warn me sooner, but after hearing my name framed as unstable, she worried involving herself would cost her job. Raymond said he should have called me the day my mother first floated streamlining. Each confession helped me. Each one also hurt. Because every family betrayal story contains two injuries: the harm itself and the audience that let it mature. Meanwhile, Lila and my mother adapted. They stopped speaking emotionally and started speaking institutionally. Their attorney, a real one this time, sent Elena a letter insisting that all disputed actions were lawful interim measures taken under grief conditions and administrative necessity. They framed my video as malicious harassment intended to sabotage a private ceremony. They implied I had selectively edited records. They accused me of coercing employees into disloyal statements. It was all very expensive, very polished, and completely lacking in actual explanations for the forged signature or fake email chain. Still, pressure worked on people. Some of the new allies got nervous. Joanne worried about being dragged into court. Denise began getting colder at work. Raymond's wife told him he was risking peace for a conflict that was between women. I hated that phrase instantly. Theft sounds much softer when people recategorize it as female conflict. The strain got worse when my mother began making personal calls. She did not contact me directly. She targeted the perimeter. Evelyn received a message saying she had been manipulated by a grieving daughter with a history of resentment. Denise was reminded by store management that loyalty mattered during transitions. Joanne was told through a mutual acquaintance that public involvement in estate disputes could affect her retirement consulting opportunities. It was subtle intimidation wrapped in respectable language. Then something happened that made the case feel bigger than inheritance. Natalie Grant's sister met me for coffee and brought a folder. Inside were screenshots from years of texts in which Grant bragged about positioning himself through relationships. One message sent long before the wedding described Lila as sweet enough to charm a room and desperate enough to be guided. Another said, "Her mom is the real gate. Get the mom, and you get the assets." I stared at the words until the room blurred. Lila had betrayed me, yes, but she had also allied herself with a man who saw our family like a puzzle box to pry open. Natalie looked at me carefully before saying, "I do not think your sister understood how much of his interest was financial. I think she believed she was his partner. She may have been his root." That complicated my emotions in a way I resented. I did not want to feel anything soft toward Lila. Not after the lies, not after the cruelty, not after the wedding video rehearsal where she laughed about erasing me. But betrayal inside families often braids itself with vanity dependency and self-deception. Lila may have chosen greed willingly. She may also have mistaken being favored for being loved. That did not excuse her. It made the tragedy uglier. With Natalie's evidence, Elena prepared a stronger filing. We now had forged documents, fake legal correspondence, suspicious business transfers, witness statements, concealed restructuring language, and messages suggesting financial motive from Grant. We were not merely reacting. We were assembling a structure sturdy enough to survive charm tiers and reputation management. And yet, just when I felt momentum finally tipping in my favor, the alliance network started to tremble from inside. Denise stopped answering my calls for almost 2 days. Joanne postponed signing a declaration. Raymond warned me that someone had been circulating the claim that I intended to liquidate the business once control returned to me, leaving employees jobless. It was a smart lie because it weaponized people's fear of instability. Families like mine know exactly which emotional lever to pull in which room. I spent one entire night at my kitchen table wondering whether truth always arrived too late to save what mattered. Not the money, the meaning, my father's name, my own credibility, the possibility of ever belonging anywhere that once called itself home. Then Denise finally called, whispering from her car. "There is more," she said, "and I think someone on your side is feeding them information." That sentence changed the air in my lungs, because outside attacks I understood. A traitor inside the alliance was something else, something intimate, something far more dangerous. If I wanted justice, I was about to learn the hardest lesson in any family revenge story. Sometimes the people helping you reach the truth are also bargaining with your enemy behind your back. When Denise whispered that someone inside our alliance was leaking information, my first reaction was denial. Not because it was impossible, because I was exhausted from learning how many versions of loyalty could quietly dissolve once pressure entered the room. For 2 months, I had rebuilt trust piece by piece. Joanne with her old ledgers, Natalie with her brother's messages, Evelyn with the connection that allowed the wedding video to reach the room, Uncle Raymond with the restructuring document my mother tried to hide, Denise with the office conversations she overheard. Each person had helped move the truth forward. Now Denise was telling me someone among them might be carrying pieces of our strategy straight back to the people we were exposing. I asked her how she knew. She said Grant had confronted her earlier that day in the storage corridor behind the hardware store, not directly accusing her, but asking very specific questions, questions only someone inside our evidence chain could have revealed. He knew about Joanne's ledgers. He knew about Raymond's unsigned witness form. And he knew we were examining the vendor transfer pattern connected to the wedding deposits. Denise swore she had never told him. Her voice sounded wounded in a way that convinced me she believed what she was saying. I did not respond immediately. I sat with Elena that evening and rebuilt the entire alliance map on paper. Names, access points, evidence each person held, conversations they had attended. It looked less like a support network and more like a fragile web. Elena circled 3 names. "Information leaks rarely travel randomly," she said calmly. "They move along relationships that already exist." Joanne had no connection to my mother or Grant outside the store history. Evelyn despised my mother openly and had nothing to gain from undermining me. Denise worked inside the store but had risked her job to help. That left 2 people with overlapping emotional incentives. Natalie and Uncle Raymond. I hated the thought instantly. Raymond was my father's brother. Natalie had already exposed her own brother's manipulative messages. Neither felt like the obvious betrayer. But obvious is rarely how betrayal works. We decided to test the leak. Over the next week, each ally would receive a slightly different update about a supposed new piece of evidence we had discovered. If that detail appeared in my mother's defense narrative, we would know exactly where it came from. Joanne heard that we had located an internal memo proving my father intended to place the entire business under my operational leadership. Denise heard that we had uncovered a private bank loan tied to Grant's personal account. Natalie heard that Elena was preparing to involve tax investigators because some transfers might have been misreported. Raymond heard that the forged signature document might trigger criminal referral for identity fraud. Then we waited. 5 days later, my mother's attorney filed a new defensive statement in court. Inside the filing was a strange paragraph. It insisted that any suggestion the estate dispute involved criminal identity fraud was an inflammatory exaggeration promoted by emotionally unstable parties. I felt my chest go hollow. That phrase came from only one conversation, the one with Raymond. Elena read the document twice before speaking. He told them, "I did not cry." The feeling was colder than sadness. Raymond had not denied helping me. He had not confronted me. Instead, he quietly informed my mother that we were considering the identity fraud angle. He gave them time to prepare. I drove to his house that evening because I needed to hear the truth from his mouth, not through legal paperwork. He answered the door slowly. When he saw my face, he did not pretend confusion. "I wondered when you would figure it out," he said. That sentence felt like a knife sliding sideways. I asked him why. His explanation sounded tired and strangely defensive. He said the family was collapsing. He said public legal war would destroy what little dignity remained after my father's death. He said my mother promised the asset transfers could be corrected quietly if I stopped escalating the case. Quietly, he repeated, without ruining everyone. Everyone, not justice, not truth. Comfort. I told him something very simple. They forged my name. He looked away. "I know, and you still warned them." His answer arrived almost as a whisper. I thought it would stop this from getting worse. In that moment, I realized something devastating. Raymond was not greedy. He was afraid of conflict, and people who fear conflict more than injustice will always protect the louder side. I left his house knowing 2 things. First, our legal strategy had been exposed earlier than planned. Second, the case was about to get uglier. The next morning confirmed it. My mother's attorney submitted an aggressive motion accusing me of harassment, defamation, and intentional interference with my sister's marriage celebration. They demanded financial penalties and claimed my video presentation at the wedding had caused emotional harm to Lila. Grant added a sworn statement saying my accusations were fabrications built from grief and resentment. Reading it felt surreal. The people who forged my name were now trying to paint me as the criminal. Even some allies began to hesitate. Joanne worried she might be dragged into a messy public trial. Denise told me management at the store had warned her not to take sides. For a few brutal days, it felt like the entire case was slipping backward. My own uncle had betrayed me. My family was attacking publicly, and the people helping me were starting to fear the consequences. For the first time since the wedding video, I wondered whether the truth might actually lose. Then someone new entered the story. Someone my mother and Grant had never considered a threat. And that person would change everything. The new ally arrived through the quietest channel possible. An email. It came from a forensic accountant named Daniel Hart. At first, I thought it was another curious observer who had seen the wedding video circulating online. The message subject simply said, regarding Mercer Hardware financial structure. Inside, Daniel introduced himself as an auditor working with a regional bank that occasionally financed commercial inventory credit lines. Mercer Hardware. My father's store had been one of their clients years earlier. He explained that while reviewing archived lending records for compliance training, he noticed something strange. Recent banking activity linked to the business looked inconsistent with the financial patterns he remembered from earlier documentation. Normally, that would not concern him, but the video from the wedding had appeared in a professional forum discussing ethics and estate fraud. And the numbers he remembered from Mercer Hardware did not match the numbers described in the circulating screenshots. So he checked publicly available business filings. Then he checked internal archived credit review summaries. The result made him uncomfortable enough to contact me. I showed the email to Elena immediately. Within 2 hours, we were on a conference call with Daniel. He was calm, precise, and extremely careful with his language, but his findings were explosive. Grant had attempted to secure a short-term inventory credit extension through a secondary lender 2 weeks before the wedding. To justify the request, he submitted financial summaries claiming the hardware store's revenue had temporarily dipped due to post-estate restructuring. However, the numbers he reported to that lender did not match the store's historical revenue profile, which meant one of two things had happened. Either the store was suddenly losing large amounts of money, or someone had altered financial documentation. Daniel compared those loan documents with older archived reports from the bank's files. The differences were obvious. Revenue streams had been shifted between categories. Certain vendor payments had been relabeled as operational expenses, and the transfers we already suspected were embezzlement had been disguised inside those categories. Grant had unknowingly created a second trail, a trail that confirmed financial manipulation beyond the estate dispute. Daniel explained the significance clearly. If these reports were submitted to obtain financing, he said, then misrepresentation becomes financial fraud. That moves the situation beyond a family inheritance disagreement. Elena muted the call for a moment and looked at me. This changes the leverage completely. Up until then, the case had revolved around probate forged signatures and misappropriated estate assets. Serious issues, but still partly framed as internal family conflict. Now, there was evidence suggesting loan fraud involving a financial institution. Banks do not treat that gently. Within days, Daniel provided certified analysis comparing the historical accounting structure created by my father with the altered reports submitted by Grant. The pattern was undeniable. Money had been moved from the business, then disguised through reclassification, then used partly for wedding expenses, and finally presented to lenders as operational fluctuation. It was elegant in a reckless way, until the math was examined by someone who understood the original structure. When Elena filed the updated legal documentation, including Daniel's forensic analysis, the tone of the case shifted instantly. My mother's attorney stopped sending theatrical letters about emotional distress. Grant's legal team requested additional time to respond. Then something even more telling happened. Grant disappeared from the store entirely. Employees told Denise he had taken personal leave. A week later, Natalie called me again. Her voice sounded different this time. Tired. Angry. She said Grant had finally confessed something to their father. Not everything, but enough. He admitted encouraging Lila to push harder for control over the estate because he believed the business and properties could be consolidated and sold within a few years for significant profit. He claimed the forged document was administrative confusion. Natalie's father did not believe him, and neither did the bank. When Daniel's report reached the lender who received the altered financial summary, they opened an internal investigation immediately. Within another week, subpoenas followed. Grant's strategy collapsed almost overnight. Without his financial framing, my mother's defense weakened badly. She could still claim grief confusion administrative mistakes, but she could not explain forged signatures, fake attorney emails, manipulated accounting reports, and suspicious loan documents all at once. The truth had too many witnesses now. For the first time since the entire nightmare began, I felt something unfamiliar. Momentum, not revenge, not victory yet, just the quiet sensation that reality was finally stronger than performance. But one final confrontation remained, because the person who started the emotional betrayal still had not faced the consequences directly. My sister. And the end of our story would happen in a courtroom where no wedding music could drown out the truth. The courtroom smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. It was nothing like the dramatic legal scenes people imagine from television. No shouting, no theatrical objections every 30 seconds, just careful questions, long pauses, and the slow dismantling of a story that had once sounded convincing inside family walls. By the time the hearings concluded, the evidence spoke with a clarity that even charm could not soften. The forged consent document was confirmed by forensic handwriting analysis. The fake legal email chain was traced back to a domain purchased through a prepaid account connected to Grant. Financial transfers from the hardware store aligned precisely with wedding payments and personal expenditures. And Daniel's forensic accounting report showed that several of those transfers had been hidden through manipulated classifications. The judge did not need dramatic speeches. The document spoke. Control of the disputed business assets returned to the estate under court supervision. The forged authorization was declared invalid. The financial investigation into the loan misrepresentation continued separately through the bank. Grant's reputation collapsed almost immediately once those findings became public record. My sister's marriage did not last long after that. Not because of my video, because trust cannot survive once people understand why someone stood beside them at the altar. As for my mother, the consequences were quieter but permanent. The court did not imprison her, but her credibility inside every financial discussion involving the estate disappeared completely. She lost the control she had fought so hard to claim. For months after the ruling, relatives avoided discussing the situation openly. Not because they doubted what happened, because it forced them to confront how easily they believed the wrong version of me. The hardest part was accepting that apology rarely arrives where truth finally stands. Some people sent careful messages saying they wished things had not gotten so complicated. Very few said the word sorry. But something unexpected grew in the empty space where my old family identity used to live. The people who helped me fight. Denise stayed at the store and eventually helped rebuild the accounting system the way my father originally designed it. Joanne visited often with notebooks and stories about the early days of the business. Natalie remained in contact long after her brother disappeared from public life. Even Evelyn became a kind of fierce honorary grandmother who reminded me weekly that honesty always feels expensive in the moment but priceless later. They were not my original family, but they were the ones who stood still when truth entered the room. That became enough. Sometimes people ask me whether sending that video to the wedding was cruel. Maybe it was. But cruelty is pretending theft is love. Cruelty is forging a daughter's name and calling her unstable when she notices. What I did was place the truth where the lies had been celebrating. And sometimes that is the only language justice understands. Now I want to ask you something. Have you ever discovered that the people you trusted most were rewriting your story behind your back? If you have lived through family betrayal, inheritance conflict, or a moment when karma finally returned to the room, share your experience in the comments. I read every story because none of us should feel alone in moments like this. If this story stayed with you, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes honesty still matters inside families. Thank you for listening to mine. And wherever you are watching from tonight, I hope the people around your table choose truth before comfort.